Hello and welcome back to the Arcane Forge. My name's Josh, and indeed welcome back to Dragon December, a celebration where I take my channel and I dedicate the entire month of December to, well, as the name suggests, dragons. In these videos, I like to cover the lore and mythology and history and real-world influences that brought Dungeons & Dragons some of its deadliest, most obscure or more popular draconic creatures. And I illustrate those while I talk about all that stuff. Because there are simply way too many different types of dragons to cover for me to just kind of pick one out of thin air as to what I wanted to do, I like to use your suggestions for creatures you'd like to see me draw. So if there is a monster in general, or as this particular month's name would suggest, a dragon that you'd like to see me draw and talk about the lore of, make sure to leave that down below in the comments section so I can add it to my to draw list and let my patrons over on Patreon vote on which ones of those they'd like to see in what order. Today's video features a seldom heard of, seldom experienced, terribly deadly and massively gruesome matchup between two of D&D's most iconic villains in the Brainstealer Dragon, which was first suggested by Duck Quack, who actually is one of my patrons. So thank you so much for your suggestion, Duck. Let's give all of these lovely people watching some nightmares, shall we? And talk about Brainstealer Dragons. Brainstealer Dragons are the malign fusions of Illithids and dragons that find their way into the depths of the Underdark and are harvested for their might by the vast psionic nightmares that are Mindflayer kingdoms. Brought before the Elder Brain, an Illithid tadpole is dropped into the eye of this once mighty and prideful creature. As this wriggling lava writhes its way into the tear duct and along the dragon's optic nerve, it finds itself a home at the base of the dragon's spine, where it snuggles up and grows to consume and transform not only the brain, but mutate the whole body of this dragon. This horrific process is known as ceramorphosis, a process that I described in more depth in my Monster Monday specifically on Mindflayers. But this transformation is almost always the same, and this is essentially how new Mindflayers come into existence. They are transformed and corrupted beings, not born, but adapted into their new form. Arguably, the tadpole is the Illithid, which pilots its new host, but then the creature they inhabit is so permanently altered in both mind and physiology that it's hard to discern where the parasite ends and the host begins. Once the transformation is complete, just with all spawn of the Mindflayers, a creature's teeth fall out, along with their hair, scales, or any other kind of keratinized structures that aren't semi-transparent, slimy, naked skin, and their faces distort into four long, muscular tentacles which wriggle and writhe, searching for nearby brains to consume. Brainstealer Dragons, therefore, are simply just another kind of Mindflayer. Any creature that undergoes ceramorphosis becomes a Mindflayer, but their frame, their silhouette, the matter that the tadpole has to work with, maintains some semblance of its original form. The majority of Mindflayers that we meet tend to have a humanoid appearance, simply because the majority of intelligent creatures, those required for ceramorphosis, who wander into the Underdark and fall victim to an Illithid's attacks, happen to be that shape. They're adventurers, we know them well. But even 5e has had time to show us what different variations might look like. We've seen a gnome Illithid, which was weirdly cute actually. And a Brainstealer Dragon is just one more such variation on the Mindflayer body shape. It stands to reason that you could just as easily have a Manticore Mindflayer, a Centaur Mindflayer, or any other combination of beings, provided that they are intelligent enough to provide a suitable atmosphere for a Illithid tadpole to gestate. Mindflayers completely take over their host. There's no memory of a life before, no spells or skills are retained, there is only a new Illithid. So if you're wondering what a Brainstealer Dragon might behave like, in personality you need look no further than a Mindflayer's stat block and accompanying information on how to represent these creatures in your game. But over the generations of D&D, there has been a little bit more light shed on these bizarre and terrifying aberrations that might give us a window into any deviations that might appear from your standard issue Mindflayer. These titanic and slimy eldritch abominations have only really seen publication in 3rd edition and were not even introduced through a mainstream supplement or expansion. They were actually introduced through issue number 337 of Dragon magazine, released in November 2005, in an article entitled Monsters of the Mind, Minions of the Mindflayers, written by Kevin Bass, Eric Jansing, Oliver Frank, and Bill Hallier, and captured in a beautifully eerie and haunting painting by Kieran Yanna, which spans an entire page of this magazine. In this article, alongside a description of how these creatures are made, we're also given a list of stats and psionic attacks, as well as combat tactics for these hideously dangerous creatures, depending on what kind of dragon is transformed. Helpfully, these stats provide options for all sorts of dragons by age, whether a baby wormling, a young adult, or ancient dragon undergo this procedure, so it's good to know that Illithids are happy to transform any kind of creature regardless of development and size into one of their kind. And while that makes them just tons more evil than I've already assumed they were, it does offer some kind of version of a Brainstealer Dragon that your players can fight in almost any level, so yay? Now, the illustration by Kieran Yanna is a really, really fantastic one. I think the kind of fleshy, scaleless, octopus-like dragon is really haunting, and its almost sightless looking eyes make it really creepy and sort of put it on the other side of the uncanny valley, make it something that it's really hard to project emotions onto, and therefore making it that little bit more scary. It looks more monstrous. It looks, rather than sort of draconic and grand, it looks like this thing is an uncaring, unflinching alien beast. And while that illustration is absolutely fantastic, I thought what I would do is throw out another kind of variant. So in my illustration, I tried to make the head a little bit more draconic. I started by basically sketching out what I thought a dragon, a generic sort of dragon, might look like, and decided to replace its horns with a series of tentacles which follow a similar path that the horns might carve through its silhouette. Illithids are fleshy, slimy creatures coated in a layer of sort of sticky mucus. They're unpleasant to all of the senses, and so I wanted to make sure this thing was not scaled and looked like if you were to touch it, you'd be touching the grim, cold flesh of a humanoid-like being. Further to that, I thought I would make this creature look even more alien by giving it a very humanoid shape. I like my dragons in general to look quite beast-like, but I decided to give this a very sort of human torso. When I draw dragons in general, I tend to draw them with this kind of avian-like chest structure. Birds have a bone plate that is shaped kind of like a V, an extruded V on their chest, which acts as a fulcrum for their muscles, essentially, because they have to put so much force into the flapping of their wings in order to drive their flight. Muscles, ligaments, and tendons have to stretch over this structure, and it gives them more force for propulsion, essentially. In the same way that the muscles and ligaments and tendons that stretch over your kneecap allow it to distribute energy much more easily, allowing you to lift your leg. If the kneecap wasn't there, it would be almost impossible for you, with your current muscles, to be able to move your leg in that capacity. And so I like to put this structure on my dragons as well, in the middle of their chest, this kind of V shape, to show that this is where the main force of your wing flapping would kind of take place. And I decided intentionally to not really do that for the Brainstealer Dragon. I decided to look at my Monster Munder illustration for reference for how I want this body structure to look, and because an Illithid tadpole transforms something into a Mind Flayer, I basically made this a Mind Flayer with a draconic shaped head, bat wings, and maybe a kind of lengthened abdomen, a long tail. But I decided to keep many of the same features that I had in my Illithid Monster Monday. So I gave it sort of 4 fingers, all of which could kind of act like thumbs. I wanted to make them look quite alien in that sense, but otherwise fairly humanoid looking arm and leg structures, give or take. And to make them look more draconic, to kind of bring this back from making it too kind of humanoid, I decided to make a really long dragon-like neck, which I had kind of swooping and arcing downwards to make this thing look kind of forlorn and grotesque, with a very exposed spine running all the way down its back along its tail. I wanted to give the impression that if this thing sort of sat down, it would curl up in a very sort of Ridley Scott xenomorph, H.R. Geiger style way, and might resemble sort of the statues, the carved statues of Cthulhu that you might have seen. But I also wanted to draw this thing sort of mid-attack, mid-breath weapon, if that makes sense. but I wanted to implant the idea that this thing might look a bit Cthulhu-like if it were all curled up. With the idea that these creatures are literally mind flayers, it seems fitting that one could simply use the stat block of a mind flayer for a Brainstealer Dragon, but that kind of defeats the object of having gone to all of the trouble of pacifying or restraining and ceramorphosizing, is that a word? A huge and deadly dragon. That's a lot of effort for an Illithid to go to for just another mind flayer at the end of this creation process. It's just not a risk that I think a mind flayer or a group of mind flayers would take if it wasn't very, very worth it for them. They had a star-spanning, reality-spanning empire, they have dwindling numbers, and they want to protect their elder brains, and they want to protect their society as they try and rebuild their empire from the ground up. I don't think they would really go to the lengths of capturing and transforming a dragon unless they had something dragon-level powerful to help them at the end of all of this. So to that end, I thought I would come up with my own stat blocks for these creatures as an early Christmas gift to you all. Initially, I wanted to follow the theme of a Dracolich or Shadow Dragon, in that I wanted to provide a template for what would happen to transform an existing dragon, but the more I wrote, the more I explored this idea, the more it seemed like such a monumental change to these creatures that a totally new stat block was needed. I'll explain my thoughts as I read out my homebrew for you, but if you want to read along with me or use these creatures in your own campaigns, then look for a link to this homebrew in my description box or on my website's homebrew section, where you can find all sorts of homebrew monsters, playable character species, spells, and magic items to embellish your campaign with. I wrote 2 extra little bits of fluff before I get straight onto the stats, in terms of my thoughts for how a Brainstealer Dragon might behave. In a caption called Mind Hoarders, I said traditionally the act of ceramorphosis, the reproductive act that transforms creatures into mind flayers, consumes the mind and completely mutates the body of the host being converted into that of an Illithid. But with a being as powerful as a dragon, some remnants of their behavior remain. While a mind flayer's hunger is centered around consuming the enzymes, hormones, and mental residue that make up a brain, dragons are obsessed with hoarding treasure and items they consider to be valuable. For the Brainstealer Dragon, this results in the hoarding of memories, minds, and experiences. They consume vast quantities of brains to sate their enormous appetites, and they like to store particularly delicious memories, thoughts, and feelings and experiences in jars, crystals, or undescribable fleshy contraptions, which they build into their nest-like hoards. It's for this reason that many adventurers seek out the lairs of Brainstealer Dragons to discover lost knowledge and relive memories thought lost to time. In a caption called Custodians of the Collective, I write that dragons tend to enjoy a life of individuality and seclusion away from those who might steal their treasure, but the act of ceramorphosis actually connects a mind flayer's will to the Illithid collective, centered around the desires of an elder brain. To this end, Brainstealer Dragons often lair at the base of an Illithid cave system and fiercely guard the elder brain. In the small chance that a dragon's will is particularly strong and their nature is not completely overridden by the transformative process that creates a Brainstealer, they may seek to form their own Illithid colonies away from the elder brain, or to become a draconic Qualith, an outcast among their creators. So I thought that would give you plenty of options for when and where to use these creatures if you wanted to have them as their own boss, or if you wanted to add that extra level of threat to players who are delving deep into an Illithid encampment or cave system. I've created stats for a Brainstealer Wormling, a young Brainstealer, an adult Brainstealer Dragon, and, most terrifyingly, an ancient Brainstealer Dragon. Generally speaking here, I gave these creatures about the same stats as a green dragon of a similar kind. I gave them the challenge rating, give or take, of a red dragon, because they are significantly more powerful than their green counterparts. So a Brainstealer Wormling, for example, is challenge rating 5, and I reduced their armor class at all kinds because the act of ceramorphosis removes their scales and their bony protrusions, leaving them fleshy and slightly more vulnerable. So I said that a Brainstealer Wormling has an armor class of 15, for example, and that an ancient Brainstealer Dragon would have armor class of 20. Where they make up for this is in having the natural psionic features that make mind flayers incredibly deadly and survivable. So in all forms of Brainstealer Dragon, I said that the thick psionic mucus that coats these Illithid aberrations grants them advantage on saving throws against spells and other magical effects. As these creatures no longer have teeth, I gave them a tentacle attack, which was taken directly from a Mind Flayer. So when you're struck by one of this thing's mouth tendrils, you take the equivalent damage that you would do from a creature's bite attack. For example, in the Wormling, you would take 2d10 plus 4 psychic damage. And then, just like a Mind Flayer, because this thing is a Mind Flayer, I've said that if the creature that is being attacked by these tendrils is the same size as the type of dragon, so for example, in a Wormling this would be a medium or smaller, the creature is then grappled with an ever-increasing escape difficulty and must succeed on an intelligence saving throw or be stunned until the grapple ends. Just like all Mind Flayers, they have an extract brain ability, saying that one incapacitated, in this case stunned, humanoid creature, which is grappled by the Brainstealer, if they meet those requirements, then the Brainstealer Dragon can try and extract its brain just as any other Mind Flayer would, causing a huge amount of piercing damage, which is 10d10 for the most part, and if this damage reduces this creature's HP to 0, then its brain is devoured. I then went one step further and retained this creature's breath weapon, but instead of it being a breath, I wanted to make it this kind of psychic onslaught. Seems like psychic damage wouldn't be something that a creature breathes, but I wanted to maintain the spirit of it. So I gave all of my Brainstealer Dragons an ability called Mind Torrent, allowing them to expel a cone of psychic energy that creatures need to pass an intelligence saving throw to avoid the full damage of. For example, a Wormling would deal 6d6 psychic damage. As the Brainstealer Dragon ages, I gave it increasing abilities, just as you find with all other types of dragons. So the young Brainstealer Dragon, which is a challenge rating 10, has innate spellcasting, which I took directly from the standard issue Mind Flayer, and I also gave it a claw attack, which deals 2d6 plus 4 slashing damage. The challenge rating 17 adult Brainstealer Dragon has an ensnaring presence instead of a frightening presence, which charms creatures rather than frightening them. I saw this as a kind of a psionic aura that it exudes. I gave it a range psychic lash rather than a wing attack. And just like all adult dragons, I gave it legendary actions, which include their ability to make a wisdom perception check, to detect something, to use one of their wing, or in this case psychic lash, ranged attacks, or to unleash a wave of psychic power in a move that costs 2 of their 3 legendary actions, known as Telekinetic Onslaught. In this I've said that the dragon unleashes a wave of telekinetic force, knocking over creatures and blasting them with nearby debris and large objects. Each creature within 10 feet of the dragon must succeed on a DC 19 dexterity saving throw, or take 2d6 plus 6 bludgeoning damage and be knocked prone. The dragon can then fly up to half their flying speed, which is a fun reflavouring of a wing attack that most adult dragons get to use. Finally, the ancient Brainstealer Dragon at challenge rating 24 gets some much needed increases to all of its terrifying damage. It gets the legendary resistance that all ancient dragons are known for, allowing it to succeed on 3 failed saving throws that it would otherwise succumb to, and it also gets to increase its psionic powers, allowing it access to things like Dominate Monster, Eye Bite, Feeble Mind, Mass Suggestion, Project Image, Scrying, and Telekinesis. But anyway, that's all for me for today. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I hope you are having a fantastic Dragon December. If you did enjoy today's video, please make sure to leave a little like down below to let YouTube know if I'm doing a good job or not. We are just Illithid tadpoles ourselves, hoping to grow into the ancient Brainstealer Dragons we hope to be, so we can only do that with your help. I hope you enjoy these stat blocks as well. Let me know if you do use them in your campaigns or have plans to do so. I'd love to hear about your adventures. And if you really love this illustration and you'd like a copy for yourself, then I would urge you to head over to my Patreon page, where backers at the Monster Monday pledge level will be receiving every single one of these illustrations that I do for Dragon December in January, as long as they back this month. You guys really help to make this channel what it is and allow me to do this fantastic job. So thank you so much. It's a really personal way to help the channel. So thank you very much. So until next time, if you are venturing into an Illithid nest, just make sure that there aren't any memories being stored in jars or crystals in case you are facing a Brainstealer Dragon as well. And happy monster hunting.